Okay. There we go. Hello, welcome to the talk. We're going to start soon. As usual, we're going to give people a chance to join us. So invite you to stick around. If you're watching this after the fact, after we're done, you can just skip ahead a couple minutes so you don't have to wait through the starting screen. But we will see you in a few minutes. Okay, so I don't know how long the delay is, but I think this, so by the time that we get started here, it should be about 12:30. So with that, I'd like to welcome you to this week's History Speaks from the Marathon County Historical Society. We are doing our final talk of this sort of mini series that we're doing on people you should know from Marathon County. And this week, it's my pleasure to introduce Gary Gisselman, a librarian and historian here at the Marathon County Historical Society, to tell us all about Olai Bache-Wiig, the paper company guy. It's probably not the best way to introduce him, but Gary will tell us more.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Olai Bache-Wiig, paper pioneer, as well as Mosinee. So I think that they have two stories in common. So we will quickly go there and start our story about this person who is a very significant part of our Marathon County history. I think that, as we'll see shortly, we will start with Olai Bache-Wiig, born June 3rd, 1876, died November 11th, 1924. An unusual story. He was born in Norway, but we'll get to that in a minute. First of all, I like to show this picture of what brought people into central Wisconsin to begin with, the Wisconsin white pine. And they played an important part in our history, especially in the 1800s. As they diminished, it played another important part in our history, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But Olai Bache-Wiig, born, like I said, 3rd of June, 1876, in Tristad, I think I'm pronouncing that right, up in the northern parts of Norway. He was educated in Norway, went to Germany and Zwickau, Germany, learning mechanical engineering. So he was educated, his family was heavily into the paper manufacturing in Norway, and the technology of Germany and Scandinavia was very important in as far as advancing the new ways of paper engineering. In 1903, he came to America seeking perhaps a better life. By 1907, he had moved into and was called and had a position up in East Angus, Quebec, Canada, the Brompton Pulp and Paper Company. He was employed there to convert a soda mill to a sulfide process. So in Germany and in Europe, the sulfide process was already starting to make headway as far as paper engineering. And Olai Bache-Wiig brought that knowledge to America when he came here. The Brompton Mill was one of the largest paper mills in North America. And it was so I'm not going to get into the technology of soda mill processing or paper processing versus the other technology of this, but it was important as what Olai Bache-Wiig brought to America, his knowledge and his technical knowledge of a new way of doing paper and pulp. In the meantime, let us quickly go back to Mosinee in central Wisconsin. The Joseph Desert Lumber Company was a big thing in Mosinee. Joseph Desert came to Mosinee in 1844, a long time there. But in 1905, he closed the mill. Things were starting to happen with Wisconsin white pine. It was starting to be diminished, and things were starting to not look so good for the sawmills and the lumber industry in central Wisconsin. In 1905, he closed the mill, moved to Milwaukee, left his nephew Louis Desert in charge of what was left really of the Desert holdings in central Wisconsin. You can see this is a map of Mosinee in 1900. Joseph Desert owned a lot of land. He owned the paper mill. It was a very significant part of the geology of central Wisconsin where this sawmill was, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But so Mosinee was starting to diminish a little bit. We can see just a little bit of a glance at the population. Mosinee was growing quite significantly, 1890, 1900. But then you look at the population of 1910, after the closing of the Desert Mill, the population of Mosinee went down by over a quarter. So we start to see the loss of people in Mosinee, and it's starting to become smaller and smaller. But at this same time, there was a group in central Wisconsin, which history is starting to call them the Wassa Group. They made a lot of money over the years. These are lumber barons. They made a lot of money, but they too started to see that the white pine was starting to be diminished, and we thus started to move into other areas of making money. Paper mills seems to have been one of the areas that they moved into. First of all, the Wassa Group invested in the Wassa Paper Mill up in Brokaw around 1900 was one that really took off. Next of all, they invested in the Marathon Paper Mill in Rockchilds. They hired D.C. Everest in 1909 to come and manage this paper mill. They also were investing in the Watab Pulp and Paper Company out of St. Cloud, Minnesota. So the Wassa Group, very well known in Minnesota even for their paper making. They were starting to make large investments in paper using the lumber that we already have, as well as the natural resources of the rivers, especially in central Wisconsin. The Wisconsin River was giving them that power that they needed for the paper mills. And one of the people that was sort of hanging around the Wassa Group, he perhaps not considered a true member of the Wassa Group, was Carl Matthey. He was the manager of the Watab Paper Mill, and he in the 1900s, and the Wassa Group hired him really as a part of this paper making group to find out about Olai Bache-Wiig, so he was charged to find Olai Bache. We do not find Olai Bache-Wiig, bring him to Mosinee to see if Olai Bache-Wiig would be willing to come to Mosinee and be a part of the engineering and the construction of a new paper mill. So Carl Matthey was in touch with Olai Bache-Wiig, brought him to Mosinee, brought him to central Wisconsin, and to eventually come to Mosinee, and decided that this is what the Wassa Group wanted to build a paper mill on that site. He was hired, Olai Bache-Wiig in 1909 was hired to design and construct a thoroughly modern paper mill, pulp and paper mill, using the sulfite process, and sulfate, I should say, which is a craft process. And I'm not getting into the chemical parts of all this, but the process that Olai Bache-Wiig brought to Mosinee was something called the sulfate or the craft process, a chemical method for the production of wood pulp. It produces a stronger pulp, a stronger paper, and a further advantage is that the craft process that can process different types of wood chips, pine, hemlock, spruce, and balsam, something that's very widespread in central Wisconsin after the white pine was pretty much diminished. So then Olai Bache-Wiig set about to build the plant, the Mosinee paper mill, sulfite process. 1910, he started to build it. Again, just some quick pictures of the mill going up there along the banks of the Wisconsin River, on the east side of the Wisconsin River in Mosinee. Just one significant part about the technology of Olai Bache-Wiig that he brought to Mosinee. This is the paper machine number 3, added in 1918. This set a world record in 1920 as the first paper machine to sustain a production rate of 1,000 feet per minute, which was quite significant in the paper technology world at that time. And it was Olai Bache-Wiig and his technology expertise really that brought all of this to the Mosinee paper mill. So here's the paper mill, complete, a very important part of Mosinee at that time. It was completed in 1911, and one sidelight of the 1911 date is that when the first insurance policy issued by what became Wassa Insurance Companies was issued to the Mosinee paper mill here in 1911. So Olai Bache-Wiig, operating superintendent here in Mosinee from 1911 to 1916, the Wausau Sulfate Fiber Company. In 1925, the mill employed 400 to 500 men. So again, you can see the significance that this was bringing to Mosinee. Again, while he was at Mosinee, Olai Bache-Wiig built the Louisiana Fiberboard Company in Bogalusa, Louisiana, the Pacific Mill plant in Ocean Falls, British Columbia, and in 1923, he formed the Tomahawk Craft Company up in Tomahawk, Wisconsin, employing then 200 men. So now we come back to look a little bit later at what happened here in Mosinee. So in 1910, we sit 482 people in Mosinee. By 1920, the population had almost, over 140% larger. So this plant really did turn Mosinee around. It started to become a more vibrant community along the Wisconsin River, south of Wassa. Of course, the population started to even out later on, but still, the presence of that mill in Mosinee was very significant as to the growth of Mosinee throughout the rest of the 20th century. So just quickly taking a look at Mosinee after 1911, a new school, a new town hall, theaters, 2 hotels, ballpark, and a swimming pool. So again, the turning around really of Mosinee, if that mill would not have come to Mosinee at that time, we really don't know what would have happened to that little community after the sawmill went out. We're not quite sure what would have happened, but we know that that mill brought new life to that community for the rest of the 1900s. Again, concluding with the picture of the Mosinee Mill sitting on the rock. One other story tied to the Mosinee Mill is that when Olai Bache-Wiig came to central Wisconsin, there was some thought of building this mill up north of Wausau at the Trap River site. But Olai Bache-Wiig didn't, the geology there was not right for this kind of mill. The bedrock here in Mosinee, sitting along the Wisconsin River, was much better, and thus the Mosinee site was determined as the site for the new paper mill. Unfortunately, Olai Bache-Wiig was killed as a result of a horse riding accident in Kentucky in November of 1924. He had married Agnes Robin and Merrill, 1912, 4 children, Lars, Ellen, Robert, and Theodore. So again, we take a look at the Mosinee Mill, quite a significant part of our history, of Marathon County's history. Not only for the technology that Olai Bache-Wiig brought to it, the sulfite process, the first complete mill in North America using that process. So in a way, it's really historic, not only for Marathon County, but it does play a part in the history of paper technology, which was very important for Marathon County in the light of the United States history as well as North American history. So we have that plant still running in Mosinee, and a very important part of our history here in Marathon County. And it was Olai Bache-Wiig who brought that technology, that new technology into Mosinee. So with that, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a glimpse at Mosinee and a little bit of the life of Olai Bache-Wiig. He has a large story, his large story with paper technology, his large story with the influences on Mosinee. This is the little bit of a brief chat that we had with regard to Marathon County history, but I wanted to bring this as a significant part of our history that we continually celebrate here in Marathon County. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ben, and he can give us a little bit of a highlight about what's coming into our future with regard to these chat sessions on Thursday.
Yeah. So like Gary said, we are the end of the year is coming up. We have technically one more week, although it's going to be a little different. Next year, in January, the theme for our history chats that we're going to do is winter sports. So we're going to take 4 weeks to highlight 4 different interesting winter sports that have had an impact on central Wisconsin. So we're going to talk about curling, ski jumping, hockey, and snowmobile racing. So those will be kind of fun coming up. And we have some kind of plans in the works for the future, but we'll hold off to let you know about those. Coming up also at the end of January, Gary here will be telling us all about the history of shopping around Wausau and the Wausau area, from the old department stores of the early part of the 20th century to the coming of the mall later in it and everything in between. So that should be kind of fun. Again, we are kind of working on the History Speaks. These are the longer, sort of a little bit more in-depth discussions that we have. We'll try to get those out there when we know more about the upcoming schedule for those. And then I kind of teased it. Next week, we're going to be not doing a very live thing, but we will have a video that'll go live at 12:30. And that'll be talking about how Santa Claus came to Marathon County in the middle of the 20th century and sort of the different aspects of that over the years, which should be kind of a fun talk as well. So with that, I'm going to go and check to see here if we have any questions. I know, let's see, Sharon Cook had asked what families were involved in the Wassa group. And obviously there, I guess, Gary, you can answer that, I'm sure. Do you want to take a crack at it?
Let me,
oh, yeah.
I think that it was, well, the key families were the Yakis, of course, the Alexanders, that classic picture of the Wassa group, mostly Mr. Yaki, Mr. Alexander, the Gilberts. You can almost go down McIndoe Street or Franklin Street, and the people were living, the Clare Birds. At different points in time, there were different members of the Wassa group. I think that the Wassa group pretty much was around, once Cyrus Yaki came to Wassa in 1899, that's when it really started to coalesce and started to be called and to come together as the Wassa group. Neil Brown, some members that initially started the Mosinee Paper Mill, were also heavily involved with the Wassa group, centering around Mr. Yaki, Mr. Alexander, and Neil Brown, and a variety of people that came. Robert Parcher was large into that at one time. The plumbers were also heavily involved. So, I mean, it was a variety of people that were heavily lumber barons, really, that really made a lot of money. Alexander Stewart made a lot of money in lumber, and it was these folks, especially after 1900, they were realizing that the white pine was running out and they had to make some other investments, and that's when they started to broaden out their investments and started to invest worldwide, really.
And I guess you could also argue that it's the Wassa group, you know, like you say, that there's a core group that we think of as the Wassa group, the guys that were always involved in the influences. But they, as you said, you know, they did pull in people like, you know, Carl Matthey and those sort of at the periphery that you wouldn't necessarily consider to be a core member, but other businessmen and local figures that, you know, played their own part from time to time. Cool. Well, it looks like that is it for questions. Oh, wait, here's another one. Tom Rademeyer on YouTube here asked, do we know anything about the early markets or customers that the Wassa paper mill serviced? And then was there a competition between the local mills is another question that he had asked.
With regard to I think that the Mosinee mill, with their craft process, their craft paper, really had their own individual market, so to speak, because this was a heavy wrapping paper that they had a very specialized paper. And as they moved throughout, as Mosinee moved into the rest of the century, they really specialized in specific types of specialized paper. And I know that the Wassa, I can't answer that right now. They had their own specialties. They really weren't in competition with each other.
Well, that kind of goes from the sort of inherited from the lumber days, where you had a bunch of different mills in this area. They weren't necessarily competing with each other as much as they were other regions, right? That was kind of the idea. So enough demand for everybody as long as people are buying paper.
There was two parts to that question.
Well, was there competition between the mills, and then what were the markets or customers that they were selling to?
And as far as I know, we did not have the Watab paper mill up in Minnesota that the Wassa group invested in, was mostly making newspaper paper. And I don't think that was being made here, but we're not, That's a good question. We should investigate that as part of our history of this paper technology going on here in Marathon County.
Yeah, awesome. That's a good question, as always. And I guess with that, we'll maybe call it a day. Thank you for joining us. And again, we'll be off for the next 2 weeks as a live thing, but we'll be back in January for some winter sports.